Good afternoon, and welcome to the Old Citadel Museum, where memory lives not in stillness but in tension, between progress and devastation, pride and regret, light and shadow. My name is Henry Blizzard, and I'll be your guide as we begin our exploration of one of our most challenging and thought provoking exhibits. Into the Heart of Darkness, Empire and Its Shadows. Inspired by Joseph Conrad's haunting novella and grounded in rigorous historical research, this exhibit examines the human, economic, and ideological machinery of European imperialism in Central Africa during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly the devastating legacy of the Congo Free State under King Leopold II. You will see artifacts that tell a story of trade and terror, rifles and rubber quotas, maps with blank spaces filled in by ambition, Bibles laid beside whips. These objects speak to what Conrad called the fascination of the abomination, a phrase that captures the uneasy mix of civilization and brutality that defined much of the imperial mission. But we've also worked hard to go beyond the colonial gaze. In this space, you'll find the voices of the colonized, the spiritual traditions, the tools, the resistance, and the resilience of peoples whose histories were too often silenced or distorted. These are not relics of savagery, as some 19th century accounts might suggest, but of lives lived, interpreted, and remembered. As you move through the exhibit, I encourage you to question not just what empire did, but what it believed it was doing, and how those beliefs echo into the present. We invite you to reflect, not to recoil, to listen, not just to look, to confront rather than to escape, just as Marlowe did in Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness begins on the Thames, where a group of sailors wait on their boat to depart to their next location. To pass the time, Marlowe tells the story of when he was in the Belgium-occupied Congo, where he was hired as a steamboat captain and ordered to make his way down the Congo River in search of Colonel Kurtz, a high-ranking and effective ivory collector who had gone missing. It was his aunt who got him the job. She believed, what many in Europe believed, that the Europeans in the Congo were actually civilizing the natives with genuine philanthropic interest. However, when Marlowe first arrives in the Congo, he is met with a number of violent scenes, such as a warship shelling the coastline for no apparent reason, and then a chain gang and labor camp of emaciated natives. So much for philanthropic concerns. The operation was one of sheer exploitation, as opposed to the propaganda they spread about philanthropy back in Europe. If Marlowe hated anything, it was a lie, as he himself states at the very beginning of the narrative, and between what he was told in Europe and what was actually happening in Africa, he found himself confronted with a profound truth to civilization, that its faith in its own goodness is largely built on lies, whereas Europe at the time believed itself to be superior in every way to the rest of the world, especially in its morals and beliefs. It was in fact violent and malevolent. Britain at the time had the largest empire, and its actions were justified only by the ideology behind it, an ideology that, by that time, Marlowe had lost all faith in, that rang hollow, that was ultimately just another lie that was convenient enough for the Western world to forego any moral blame. Marlowe, however, is the only character who seems able to resist these lies. He questions rather than accepts the white man's place at large in the Congo. As Marlowe makes his way down the river, he is met with one colonial character after the next, and sees in each character a certain lack of humanity, especially in the way they speak of the natives. Their heartlessness makes them about as awful as they believe the natives are. Eventually, after a couple deadly conflicts with the natives, and after many a dark, creepy night spent gazing at the forest and wondering at the carnage all around him, Marlowe does find Colonel Kurtz, who is terminally sick and largely insane. Though he had once been the most ruthless and effective colonizer, playing God amongst the natives, he was eventually overcome by the jungle itself, leaving Marlowe to return to Europe practically traumatized. Having returned, however, Marlowe felt compelled to speak to Kurtz's fiancée on his behalf, to hopefully give her some closure, though he had so little himself. Still, he visits with her, and she asks him what his last words were. Rather than tell her the truth, which was that his last words were, "the horror," he lies and tells her that he said only her name. Though he hated to lie, he needed to lie, lest he unravel everything she thought she knew about Kurtz. The truth proved to be far more dangerous than the lie. At the end, the lie Marlowe told her is not all that different from the propaganda King Leopold II spread in Europe. The ideology, the belief in superiority and righteousness, never existed. What existed instead was horror. It is up to us in a post colonial age to face these horrors if we are ever going to arrive at the truth.